Now, Marietta.
Marietta was organized in 1884 by Charles F. Hatch, a town site agent for the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railroad, and Charles and Charlotte Summermeyer, the owners of the land where the railroad wanted to build a town. According to one source, pioneers of Marietta, Ohio settled there. It had its own newspaper. The Marietta News began in 1897 and was published until 1952. The Marietta Messenger began in August 1900. The first school began in 1897. There was an elementary and high school until 1990, when the last class of 9 students graduated. Lightning hit the bell tower in the old part of the school after school had been dismissed in 1990 and the school was destroyed. The decision had been made early in the school year that the 89-90 year would be the final year of the Marietta School.
Marietta was a bustling town into the mid-1900s. There was a business called the Lilly Thread Company that shipped thread all over the United States. Ralph Baker had that grocery store, more like a general store, in town and started Lilly Mills in the store in approximately 1939. The only other distribution centers for Lilly Thread Company were in Chicago and San Francisco. There was a post office, drugstore, ice cream shop. There were 2 hotels that each had a cafe, 3 grocery stores, a locker plant, 2 lumber yards, a creamery that made butter, a barber shop, pool hall, even a popcorn stand if the weather was nice, 2 blacksmith shops, an implement shop, a furniture store with a funeral parlor, a school, and 3 churches. For a time, it had a mini golf course. There was a fire department, and it had its own light plant with some awfully daredevil line workers.
There was also a jewelry store and a bank. But then in 1970s, things started to change. Farm equipment was getting larger and more efficient. Larger equipment meant the ability to farm more land. And with the farm crisis in the 1980s, many farmers had to sell their land, which was bought up by farmers who then had even larger farms. Where there had been farms with 160 acres, there were getting to be farms with hundreds and even thousands of acres. That meant fewer farmers, which meant less business for the town merchants. Stores began to close. That is what occurred in Marietta. The once bustling community became a quieter one. Salt Lake, a great area for bird watching, is located only 4 miles southwest of Marietta.
There was one town that started near Marietta called Haydenville. 2 gentlemen, Gerhard Harrigus and Herbert Hayden, wanted to serve farmers between Madison and Marietta. They chose the name by a flip of a jackknife between Harrigasville and Haydenville. Guess who won? The town had businesses that sold implements and automobiles, a grain elevator, lumber yard, restaurant, and a school. A bank was built, but it never opened and was moved to NASA. The town, while still on the map, does not exist and consists of only 1 residence. So, let's move on to Dawson.
Dawson started in 1884. The towns in Lackapaw County were mostly built by the railroads. The railroad people would get investors to work with a local landowner to plat out the town. One of the founders of Dawson was William Dawson, who was president of the Bank of Minnesota in Minneapolis. He and 2 other men bought the land for Dawson and called themselves the Dawson Town Site Company. They then sold lots for homes and businesses. They charged quite a good price for each, which surely left them very wealthy. In 1891, they sold the remaining unsold lots to the Dawson Town Site Syndicate, a group of local businessmen.
By December 1884, just a few months after the railroad first built its line, Dawson had 31 businesses, 60 buildings, and a population of 300. Every able-bodied man was required to put in 1 day a year to clean up the streets or pay a fee of $1.50. Some of the businesses were moved to Dawson on skids from Lac La Prairie Village after it did not get the railroad.
A school was started in 1884, the same year the town was founded. Education was very important to the settlers who were established in Dawson. In fact, the site chosen for the school is the same site as the current Dawson Boyd Public School. After the merger of Boyd and Dawson, a new school was built in 1978.
Plays and musicals were always important to Dawson. There was an opera house that seated 800 people. The first movie ever shown was in 1912. It was a silent movie called The Sinking of the Titanic. Just think, there was no talking in the movies. All you saw was the picture. The theater had a piano player who would play certain music for the mood. Let's say that the villain was going to capture the good guy. The music would sound like this. And if it was a love scene, it might sound like this.
That opera house had the name The Swinging Door because the fire marshal required the doors to swing outward for safety. A movie theater was eventually built, and it was called the Grand Theater. That name sounds very familiar.
Another part of Dawson is the Carnegie Library. The town's father started a fund in 1886 to build a library. First, there was a traveling library in the drugstore, and then a small library in the school's superintendent's office. In 1915, the mayor contacted Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was helping towns build libraries all across the country. He had some rules, and if towns promised to meet his requirements, the Carnegie Foundation would give the town money to build a library. Dawson promised to furnish a lot on which to build the library and pledged $900 a year to support it. The Carnegie Foundation gave Dawson $9,000 to build a library, and it was built in 1916. The building is still being used today, though not as a library.
In 1902, the first hospital was built in Dawson. In 1914, a hospital was built called Dawson Surgical Hospital. It was 3 stories and had a nurses' training school from 1915 to 1932 with a dormitory for the students. The nurses would train for 2 years at the Dawson Hospital and then 1 year at either Minneapolis General Hospital or University Hospital. Dawson had 2 very important doctors during that time, Dr. C.M. Johnson and Dr. H.M. Johnson. Dr. H.M. Johnson was one of the incorporators of the hospital. His son, Dr. V.M. Johnson, nicknamed Bill, joined the staff in 1940.
In 1974, a new hospital was built, dedicated in 1975 as Johnson Memorial Hospital to honor the long service of the Johnsons. Dawson has had some very long-term businesses. Erickson Chevrolet was started in 1935 by Ernie Erickson. He acquired the Chevrolet dealership in 1941. Lac La Prairie Co-op was organized in 1924 as Dawson Cooperative Oil Company. They purchased Midwest Fertilizer from Rudy Presto. They continue to have a strong presence in Lac La Prairie County with a subsidiary branch in Madison. Lee Motors was started in Dawson in 1930 by Arthur Lee. He had been in business with his brothers in Madison called Lee Brothers, which was a Ford dealership that started in the 1920s, but Arthur decided to buy his own dealership. Both Lee Brothers and Lee Motors took horses and other livestock as trade-ins for vehicles. Art Lee later added the John Deere line to his Ford business in Dawson. Hanson and Dahl have been in Dawson since 1915, first with a furniture store as well as a mortuary. They closed the furniture store in 1982.
Dawson is nicknamed Gnome Town. Have you noticed all the gnomes along Highway 212 in Dawson? In 1988, Dawson decided to start honoring a local citizen for commendable work in the community by having a local artist carve their likeness as a gnome, which would be placed in the park. The announcement of the current year's honoree is done at Riverfest, Dawson's celebration held the last weekend in June.
Let me introduce you to one of the gnomes who will tell you their story as first told by Alta Roche.
According to the legend of Gnome Town, the little people knew that no one believed in them anymore. Human adults were far too busy, and human children only wanted to watch television. They had to decide if they should band together and move across the sea, or if they should simply be no more. And so old Torvig, a member of the Council of Little People, made this pronouncement to his fellow woodland creatures. Whether leprechaun or kobold, we will now be called gnomes. We will cross the sea to a place called Minnesota, and there we will go to a peaceful city called Dawson. The people there from the country and the town work together to make good things happen. For us, this will be a good place. When we get there, we will show them we are neat, helpful, and will bring a smile to their faces. We will show we have heart. We will wear it on our sleeves for all to see. And Dawson will be Gnome Town, Minnesota.
What a wonderful story.
I win the whole essay contest for being the most creative, right?
We'll see. Let's hear about Madison. Madison, as with the other towns in Lackabarl County, was established by a group of investors who believed that putting a town in the geographic center of Lackabarl County would mean that it would be eventually the county seat. The land they purchased was a little low and swampy, but it was the center of the county, and so that is where they established the town. Madison is named after Madison, Wisconsin. It's on the 45th parallel.
What does it mean to be on the 45th parallel?
Well, parallel means that two lines never intersect, right? So what is it parallel to? One of the other towns?
I think we're getting a little far-fetched here. Please just read your essay. Okay. It means that Madison is halfway between the North Pole and the equator. You can have your picture taken by the 45th parallel sign at the Lackabarl Museum.
Now I get it. The North Pole is very, very cold, and the equator is very, very hot. So the weather in Madison must be perfect.
I don't know. I'm just a kid, not a scientist. Anyway, when Madison was first established in 1884, many of the citizens of Lackabarl Village put their houses on rollers or skids and moved them to Madison. Businesses, too, were moved that way. Those people wanted to be in a town with a railroad. Madison kept growing and became quite a prosperous town. It established a fire department and built a hospital that was the only hospital between Minneapolis and Watertown, South Dakota for a period of time. It established a college called the Luther Normal School. In fact, in 1890, when the United Lutheran Church decided they would build and support a school, there were many towns that offered to have it built there. Madison guaranteed $16,000, which would have been a very large sum at the time, and free transportation of building materials. Madison was chosen as the location for the school. It was built in 1892 on the location where Hilltop Residence is now located. However, the normal school closed in 1932.
There were bank robberies in the 1930s. In 1933, Klein Bank, now called Old National Bank, was robbed twice. Once in February, where the robbers stole over $8,000, and once in April, when they got $2,000. The last robbery, though, was the scariest one. Someone managed to set off the alarm, which alerted people to what was happening. The postmaster shot at the robbers, and so did others in town. The editor of the Western Guard was shot at, but the bullets missed him. Others weren't so lucky. Your parents and grandparents may know some of the people who were shot. A fellow by the name of Z.L. Hayden was shot in the chest and leg. Hans Strand was hit in his hand, and Jens Evenson in the leg. None of the bank employees inside the bank were hurt, but at least one of them, Vern Molstead, had been in the bank for both robberies.
Madison has had some very famous citizens. You've already heard from Jacob Jacobson. He was so important to Madison, getting the county seat and our state legislator, that Madison named a park for him. The park is near the fairgrounds.
Another important person was Theodore S. Slen, a judge from Madison. He was a teacher in our rural schools, attended St. Olaf College, and earned his law degree from the University of Minnesota. During World War I, he was stationed in Europe and was wounded in France. He received the Purple Heart, a Silver Star, and Francis Croix de Guerre Award. He returned to Madison in 1919 and began his practice of law and his career as a judge. He also served 2 terms in the Minnesota legislature and was the first chairman of the DFL party. He was a charter member of the Madison Kiwanis Club. The swimming pool park is named after him.
And speaking of Kiwanis clubs, the Madison Club started in 1929. There are also 2 study clubs, Lions, and the Sons of Norway that started around 1905. That's about 115 years ago and is still active. These are all service clubs working for the betterment of Madison.
Madison has so much to be proud of. The City Hall has been in use for over 100 years. The library is a Carnegie library built in about 1905 with the Carnegie Foundation providing some of the funds. That library is still in use as a library to this day. It, along with the City Hall and the courthouse, are all on the National Register of Historical Sites.
Something else that is very special in Madison is the Prairie Arts Center. When the First Lutheran Church and the Madison Lutheran Church merged, a new church was built called the Faith Lutheran Church. That left the First Lutheran Church empty. Some visionaries in Madison saw that building and just knew it could become something special. It was purchased in 1973 and was renovated into the theater you are sitting in today. The Lacaparo Players also perform here yearly, and there's also a festival every year called Stinker Days.
There must have been a lot of skunks in that town.
Yeah, and they sprayed everyone, and they all stunk.
It was called that because in 1957, Madison decided to pave its streets. In August of that year, the project was finished and was celebrated as Blacktop Days, but eventually was changed to Stinker Days because people remembered the smell of the tar. And now we celebrate Stinker Days every year. When Madison needs something, the citizens pull together to get it done. There are 2 perfect examples. 110,000 was needed to bring the theater into the 21st century with digital projectors and new screens. In a matter of a few months, that was done. Another fundraiser allowed the theater to put in all new seating.
What are you doing?
I'm thirsty with all this talking. Besides, it's part of my speech. Did you know that in 1917, Henry Roth started a bottling plant in his basement? He used a hand capper and bottled 20 bottles of pop a day, which he delivered in a hand-pulled cart. He named his company Madison Bottling Works. His original building was at 628th Street. That building later became Madison Meats, owned by David Roth. Madison Bottling moved its plant to a new location on Highway 40 at the east edge of Madison. It's been in business for over 100 years. Madison Bottling remains a family-owned business.
When the 1930s swimming pool needed either serious repair or build an entirely new pool, the citizens again went to work and raised much of the money needed to complete that project, and there is now a beautiful new pool. And all of Madison can be proud of the county courthouse. It has been maintained and modified as needed and kept as beautiful as the day it was built nearly 125 years ago.
Thank you. That was an interesting report about Madison.
Excuse me, you left out a very important part of Madison.
And what is that?
That we are the lutefisk capital of the United States. I'm sure you've seen lutefisk near the fairgrounds. He represents our famous status.
Aren't you Jerry Ostros, the lutefisk eating champion?
Why? Yes, I am.
You've won so many lutefisk eating contests that I think people have lost count. I heard you were even on David Letterman, but I heard you lost to a fellow from Norway.
That wasn't a loss. He cheated.
How's that?
Well, this Norwegian television host was filming in Minnesota and heard about my lutefisk eating capabilities and challenged me to a contest. We met in Hutchinson, Minnesota, and they filmed the event. I couldn't keep up with him, but when I found out he had a vacuum hidden under his shirt and was stuffing the lutefisk into the vacuum, so I really won that one too, because I ate my lutefisk.
Madison was settled by mostly Norwegians and over the years celebrated their Norwegian heritage with special events and the lutefisk statue, where people often have their pictures taken. And there is even a song about Madison written by Luther Bjerke. Class, let's sing it. Lutefisk and lefse and a norski meatball. Madison, Minnesota is a lot more than a mall. Lutefisk and lefse on the 17th of May. Madison, Minnesota, lutefisk capital USA. Thank you, class, for the history lesson on the towns in Lac-qui-Parle County. On that note, class time is up. Class dismissed.
By 1916, there were two accredited high schools, Madison and Dawson. Bellingham, Marietta, and Boyd later built high schools as well. Nassau, Rosen, Lewisburg had elementary schools. The closing of the schools was a hard decision for these towns to make.
When Madison had a fire at the high school in 1987, it was decided to build a high school in the country with some of the area towns because all of the area schools were experiencing declining enrollment. Madison, Appleton, Milan, and Marietta-Nassau formed Lac-qui-Parle Valley High School. Today there are two high schools in Lac-qui-Parle County. They are Dawson Boyd High School and Lac-qui-Parle Valley High School. The two schools do combine for various activities, and they get along very well. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 10-minute intermission begins.